Even beyond the concept of sentient dogfighting and the potentially mega dark implications that come along with it, Pokemon has a very weird niche in the medium. The game plays out as a send-up to and a celebration of a dead genre that died because it was repetitive and boring. Yet somehow, despite all this, the franchise is popular enough to sell Mario numbers in an era where the games it's inspired by have kinda left the consumer's collective consciousness. The game's still super retro, but it's not trying to be, it's a living fossil. It never modernized because it never had to. And while that's pretty impressive, it also means that the game has a ton of decade-old problems that just never got fixed up with time. Previously on the show, I made a video about how Pokemon's PvP suffers from being so deep and tedious that it hurts the game's accessibility to new players. But the PvE suffers from kind of the opposite problem, where the game's so simple that it loops back around to becoming tedious, repetitive, and most importantly, laughably brain-dead easy. First off, the AI is terrible at the game, never switching out and hardly ever having any form of team synergy. They're lucky to even have a full team half of the time, and as if the deck weren't stacked enough in the player's favor, it's painfully simple to just outlevel your opponent for a simple sweep. Competitive Pokemon is all about feints and reads while jumping between different positions that harmonize together, but fighting the AI is just a game of rock, paper, scissors where you're given a heads up of what your opponent's going to play next. What I find so particularly frustrating about this is that the games have come so close to fixing these problems over the literal decades, only to just go back in the next title. Game Freak doesn't really ever make any public comments about this kind of stuff, certainly not in English, so I couldn't possibly know why these issues have been so persistent throughout the years. But I feel confident enough to throw out a few guesses. They may think that it's too difficult to set up and improvise any type of synergized team just out of the wild mons you find lying around. They may not want to make the game too difficult for younger or newer players who wouldn't be any good at thinking ahead or would be blindsided by certain moves. It may even be something as simple as the developers who work on these aspects of the game just see it as an old-fashioned JRPG and are less interested in the strategy aspect of things. Now, I don't like any of these excuses because they prioritize people who aren't me. Pokemon's target demo will always be kids who want to play an RPG, and people who appreciate it as a strategy game will always be relegated to the splash zone. But I'm confident that there are solutions where everybody can win. First off, I think it would be easier on the AI and more fun for the player to return to a focus on the double battle format. Not only does this 2-on-2 style more accurately emulate RPGs of the past, but since the computer can actually have a strategy without overwhelming the player, battles can be more intricate and cinematic. Right now the way the AI works is basically to just use whichever move will do the most damage with a strict order to which Pokemon comes out when. And that really isn't the best way to play the game. Since the lead is always one of the weakest mons on the team, the safest, fastest, and most efficient strategy is to just set up early on and sweep before the computer can even play the video game. It's supposed to feel like a last stand when they get to their last mon, but it just kind of ends up as a victory lap for the player. The best rounds of singles are more defensive and based on reads. You're constantly trying to minimize the damage you take this turn while moving to a more advantageous position for the next. The AI isn't smart enough to play on that level, and even if it were, the children playing these games would just get creamed. So we end up playing really simple matches where everything is just based on speed and type. Meanwhile, double battles are much more reliant on setting up your own tech while preventing your opponent from doing the same. It would be a lot more fun to adapt to and destroy the enemy AI's flowchart than to just pick the mathematically strongest move each turn. We've seen this done before in games like Colosseum and XD. Each boss fight had some goofy gimmick you'd need to learn to counter, like a team full of healers or one that spans Protect Earthquake into Earthquake Protect, and that little difference added a bunch of depth to the experience. On one hand, that proves that the style can be really entertaining in a campaign, but on the other hand, the 13 years between then and now shows us that Game Freak doesn't really seem all that interested in putting out something else like that. So take that how you will. Another mechanic that would help the player experiment might just be lowering the importance of EXP in general. In the main game, you never really want to box up party members since you know that everything you do without them just means that they're missing out on levels. That also means that you're less likely to experiment with different playstyles just out of convenience. A couple possible solutions to this could be a lower level cap or even just a series of caps that get bumped up every time you get a badge, or maybe even just a system where it rounds you down to a uniform level for special fights like in the battle tree. That way you can't just solve all your problems with high-level sweepers, and you can even get an incentive to experiment when you hit that cap. So we've managed to challenge the player while still leaving them open to customizing their party, so all we need now is a recursive post-game that'll keep them entertained once the game stops feeding them content. As it is now, once the game's over, you've only got like 3 side quests and the battle zone. Not much to hold the player's interest, and if the player ever wanted to go through the campaign again, they'd have to dump their only save slot. So I think it might be nice to have some sort of New Game Plus function. This could be anywhere from starting the game over with your same PC, an empty map, and a universal buff to all enemy Pokemon, or maybe even just something simple like hunting down the gym leaders again before another run at the Elite Four. As long as the player feels like they've got a challenge waiting for them, they'll keep entertained. Pokemon's charm comes from how many options you've got, and how emergent different teams and matchups can be. Different teams can struggle and sweep in different parts of the game, and it's fun to just come up with some silly gimmick strats. You can't really have any fun against Joey's Rattata because there's nothing to do but knock it out. You want to have to think about what your opponent's next move will be. You'd like to be mentally present at least. I don't think I've made any big asks in this video, and I imagine that these changes would be universally celebrated by Pokemon fans of all backgrounds. People look back on the hardest of the Pokemon games, like Colosseum and Heart Gold, most fondly of all, and I doubt the occasional team wipe would do anything to hurt the game's crazy sales or absurd popularity. These fixes wouldn't be too difficult to implement either. I don't imagine anyone could have any objections over them. We've already seen steps in the right direction with things like the Key XP share and reusable TMs, but there's still a long way to go. I've been playing these games for about 2 decades, and I've seen them get a lot better with time, but I've also seen a lot of good ideas fade away between the titles. I suppose the best I can do to contribute is to celebrate the new stuff when we get it, and make a ruckus when something breaks. That way the renovations will eventually overthrow some of those obsolete traditions, and we can all have a better time on the other side.